We all know the story of the Pharaoh's curse. It feels like a scene from a Hollywood blockbuster. A sealed tomb, a forgotten king, and a deadly magic unleashed upon the foolish. But what if the reality was far stranger and far more terrifying than fiction? What if these ancient curses were not just superstitious threats, but were in fact sophisticated weapons, cold, calculated technologies of psychological warfare, biological attack, and even acoustic manipulation designed to break minds and end lives? Could you tell the difference between a spell and a science you do not understand? Join me as we descend deep into this rabbit hole, moving layer by layer down an iceberg of forbidden knowledge, from the stories you think you know to the shocking theories lurking at the very bottom of our past. Level 1. The Curse of the Pharaohs, marketing ploy or real threat. Have you ever stood before a museum exhibit of ancient Egyptian artifacts and felt a faint, almost imperceptible chill? A sense of profound antiquity, of sleeping powers that are best left undisturbed. For centuries, this feeling has been crystallized into a single terrifying idea: the Curse of the Pharaohs, a legend that whispers of a deadly magic guarding the golden sleep of kings. But was this curse a genuine supernatural force? Or was it one of the most successful marketing campaigns in history, written not in hieroglyphs, but in newspaper headlines? Our journey begins in the year 1922, in the sun-scorched Valley of the Kings. The British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of fruitless searching, finally uncovers the steps leading down to the tomb of a little-known boy king, Tutankhamun. The discovery was a global sensation. The world watched, breathless, as Carter and his patron, Lord Carnarvon, broke the seals and laid eyes on treasures untouched for over 3,000 years. But then, the story took a darker turn. Lord Carnarvon died suddenly, just a few months later, from an infected mosquito bite. The press, hungry for a sensational narrative, seized upon the event. Soon, a narrative began to form. A wave of mysterious deaths was sweeping through those associated with the expedition. Financier George J. Gould died of pneumonia after visiting the tomb. Radiologist Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, supposedly fell ill and died. The stories grew more elaborate with each telling. Was this the Pharaoh's revenge? Had Carter and his team unleashed an ancient power they could not comprehend? The mystery itself became an artifact, passed down through generations. The truth, however, is far more fascinating than the legend. The famous inscription that became the cornerstone of the curse, the one that reads, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king," has never been found in Tutankhamun's tomb. In fact, it does not appear in any known tomb. It was a brilliant, chilling fabrication, most likely invented by journalists to sell newspapers. The actual inscriptions found were far more nuanced. They were religious spells from the Book of the Dead, designed to protect the pharaoh's soul on his journey through the afterlife, not to threaten archaeologists in the future. The so-called curse was not an ancient magic, but a modern one. The magic of media, capable of turning a series of unfortunate but statistically unremarkable coincidences into a global myth that endures to this day. Roman Defixiones, Leaden Letters of Hate. From the grand, media-fueled legend of the Pharaohs, we turn to something far more personal, intimate, and vicious. Imagine you are a citizen of ancient Rome. A rival has stolen your business, a lover has betrayed you, or a charioteer you bet against is about to win a crucial race. You do not simply accept your fate. You take action. You seek out a quiet place, and with a stylus, you begin to write, not on paper, but on a thin, soft sheet of lead. This is a defixio, a curse tablet, a letter of pure malice addressed directly to the gods of the underworld. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of these remarkable objects across the entire span of the former Roman Empire, from the misty shores of Britain to the deserts of Syria. They were a common, almost mundane part of life. People used them for everything. A shopkeeper might curse a competitor, asking the gods to bind his hands and shutter his business. A spurned lover would meticulously inscribe a plea for their rival to become mute and unable to please. There were even tablets found near the great chariot racing stadiums, cursing opposing drivers and their horses with broken limbs and spectacular crashes. The ritual was precise. After writing the curse, the tablet would be pierced with an iron nail, a symbolic act of fixing or binding the victim. Then it had to be delivered. These leaden letters were dropped into wells, buried in fresh graves, or hidden in the walls of temples dedicated to underworld deities like Pluto or Hecate, turning these sacred places into a kind of supernatural postal service for human hatred. But why lead? And why the nail? The Romans believed the cold, heavy nature of lead would magically transfer those properties to their victim, making their limbs cold and heavy. The nail was not just a pin, it was a magical shackle, binding the person's soul and actions to the words written on the tablet. The system was shockingly direct, and the words themselves are what truly take your breath away. These were not vague wishes of ill fortune, they were brutally specific. One tablet found in Britain reads, "I curse Tritia Maria and her life and mind and memory and liver and lungs mixed together, and her words, thoughts, and memory. Thus may she be unable to speak what is concealed." Another states with chilling precision, "Let his intestines be twisted, let his tongue grow numb, let his hands and feet become as cold as this lead." To enhance the dark magic, the victim's name was often written backwards, a simple but powerful act of linguistic scrambling, intended to scramble their very essence and make the curse impossible to undo. The voodoo doll, a global symbol of black magic. There are few magical objects as instantly recognizable, as viscerally unsettling, as the so-called voodoo doll. An image comes to mind immediately, a small crude figure, perhaps made of cloth or wax, with sharp pins piercing its fabric skin. It is a symbol that has been cemented in our collective consciousness by horror movies and folklore as the ultimate tool of personal magical attack. And while its most famous association is with the complex spiritual tradition of Haitian Voodoo, the core principle behind this effigy is one of the oldest and most widespread magical ideas in human history. It is the law of sympathy, the belief that an object in the likeness of a person holds a direct, tangible connection to that person. That like affects like, that whatever you do to the doll, you do to the person it represents. This was not an invention of the Caribbean. In ancient Greece, they were known as kolossoi. In Egypt, shapers of wax were common. Across medieval Europe, the practice of creating poppets or using voltage to harm an enemy was a constant fear, whispered about in villages and prosecuted in witch trials. The principle is universal because the psychology behind it is so potent. But let us pause and consider the true power of this act. Forget for a moment whether the magic itself is real. Instead, imagine what it does to the human mind. Imagine you learn that someone who despises you, a rival, an enemy, has created a doll in your image. They possess a piece of your hair, a scrap of your clothing. At this very moment in the dead of night, they are performing a ritual, methodically pushing pins into the heart, the head, the limbs of your likeness, whispering your name with every malevolent act. The psychological effect would be devastating. The constant stress, the paranoia, the fear could manifest as real physical illness. The curse becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, powered not by supernatural energy, but by the victim's own terror. Yet, in the ancient world, this was not merely a tool for personal revenge. It was an instrument of the state, In ancient Egypt, the creation of effigies was a formalized part of state-sanctioned magic and warfare. Before a military campaign, royal priests would craft hundreds of wax or clay figurines. These were not dolls of individuals, but representations of enemy kings, entire foreign armies, and rebellious cities. Then, in grand public ceremonies, these figures would be ritually bound, spat upon, broken, stabbed, and finally burned in consecrated fires, all while chanting spells of destruction. This was not a back-alley hex, it was foreign policy. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, designed to ensure victory for the pharaoh by magically annihilating the enemy's strength and morale before a single arrow had been fired. The Nithing Pole, a Scandinavian curse that destroys honor. We journey now to the cold, windswept lands of the Norse, where a different kind of curse held sway. It was a curse aimed not just at the body, but at something a Viking warrior held far more dear: their honor, their name, their very place within society. This was the Nidstang, the Nithing Pole or Scorn Pole, and it was a weapon of utter social and spiritual annihilation. The ritual was one of raw, symbolic power. A long wooden pole was erected, and upon its top was impaled the raw, severed head of a horse, its dead eyes and bared teeth facing the home of the intended victim. Runes of power and hatred would be carved into the wood of the pole, invoking the darkest forces and declaring the subject of the curse a nithing, a word for which we have no perfect modern equivalent. It meant a wretch, a coward, a villain, a person so devoid of honor that they were effectively subhuman, an outcast from the bonds of kinship and law. We see a famous account of this in the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, where the warrior poet Egil erects a nithing pole against King Eirik Bloodaxe and Queen Gunhild, cursing them to be driven from the land. This was not a subtle act. It was a public declaration of war on a person's entire existence. It raised a terrifying question for the Viking mindset. What was a greater fear? To die a clean death in the heat of battle, earning a place in Valhalla? Or to live on, but as a nithing, stripped of all reputation, shunned by your clan, your name a byword for shame? It was a choice between physical death and social death, and for many, the latter was a far more dreadful fate. But the true genius and terror of the nithing pole went even deeper than public shaming. The curse was not merely aimed at a person. The horse's head was directed at the very land where the enemy lived, and the curse was spoken not only to them, but to the invisible spirits that dwelled there, the Landvettir, the ancient guardian spirits of the earth. The ritual was designed to insult, enrage, and drive away these protective entities. The goal was to spiritually poison the enemy's home, to make the land itself turn against them, becoming barren and cursed. It left the victim utterly alone and defenseless, abandoned not only by their community, but by the very spirits of the world they inhabited. It was a complete and total magical destruction. But these public rituals and personal vendettas, as powerful as they were, are merely the visible surface. To understand the true mechanics and the terrifyingly systematic nature of ancient curses, we must now dig beneath the common stories and examine the cold, calculated technologies of magic that were woven into the very fabric of politics, law, and religion. Level 2. Aztec Curses. The power of the priestly word. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the New World in the early 16th century, they encountered a civilization of breathtaking complexity and brutal piety, the Aztec Empire. They saw cities built on water, towering pyramids, and markets teeming with life. But they also witnessed a spiritual world that was, to them, profoundly alien and terrifying. At the heart of this world was a priestly class whose power was absolute, for they were the conduits to the gods, and their words, when uttered in ritual, could be as sharp as an obsidian blade. In the Aztec worldview, curses were not the domain of common folk settling petty squabbles. They were a sophisticated instrument of the state and the temple, wielded by priests in service to powerful and capricious deities like Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, lord of the night, sorcery, and inexplicable misfortune. An official curse, pronounced from the heights of a temple pyramid, was a death sentence delivered by the cosmos itself. These rituals were elaborate affairs, involving intricate chants in the Nahuatl language, the burning of copal incense, and often blood sacrifice. The intended effects were specific and dreadful: incurable diseases that would waste the body away, a madness that would shatter the mind, or a persistent streak of bad luck that would ruin a man's fortunes and family. The conquistadors, shielded by their own faith and steel armor, often dismissed these displays as little more than pagan spectacle. But one wonders if, in the dead of night, surrounded by the unfamiliar sounds of the jungle and the ever-present beat of distant drums, they ever felt a prickle of genuine fear. Did they ever wonder if the words of the priests held a power their Christian God could not protect them from? The most potent testament to this power lies not in what the Spanish saw, but in what they sought: the legendary lost treasure of Moctezuma. According to the legends that followed the conquest, the vast hoards of gold hidden by the last Aztec emperors were protected by more than just stone and secrecy. They were shielded by potent curses, laid by the most powerful priests. These spells were not designed to simply kill a trespasser, but to break their mind first. It was said that anyone who drew too near the hiding places would be plagued by horrifying visions: spectral jaguars with eyes of fire stalking them in the darkness, immense serpents slithering from the walls, and the ghostly screams of sacrificed warriors echoing in their ears. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a curse designed to make the victim's own mind their executioner. The technology of Greek katadesmoi. If the Roman curse tablet was a blunt instrument, a leaden hammer of hate, then its Greek predecessor, the katadesmos, was a finely honed scalpel. The word itself translates to a binding down, and this reveals the core of Greek magical philosophy. They sought not always to destroy an enemy, but to paralyze them, to bind their will, their tongue, their hands, and their mind, rendering them utterly helpless. This was a subtle and insidious form of magical attack, and the Greeks developed a remarkable technology for its delivery. Like the Romans, they used thin sheets of lead, but their methods of deployment were far more inventive. A katadesmos might be folded tightly, pierced with a nail, and dropped into a well or a spring sacred to the nymphs, enlisting the spirits of the water as agents of the curse. More sinisterly, a skilled curse maker might attempt to secretly hide the tablet within the victim's own home, under a floorboard, in the thatch of the roof, so that the malevolent energy would constantly radiate from within, poisoning their life at its very source. The symbolism of binding was paramount. It was common to find small figurines buried along with the curse tablets. These effigies, often made of lead or clay, would be depicted with their hands and feet bound tightly behind their backs, their bodies contorted. The curse inscribed on the tablet would then explicitly state that, just as this figure is bound and helpless, so too should the victim be bound and helpless in their legal case, their business dealings, or their romantic pursuits. This raises a fascinating question about the very nature of this magic. Was it the words themselves, or the symbolic act of binding that held the true power? But the most astonishing discovery, the one that rips back the veil on just how integrated this dark magic was in society, was unearthed in a grave near Athens. Dating back to the 5th century before the Common Era, the supposed golden age of philosophy and democracy, archaeologists found what can only be described as a magical arsenal. Hidden away was a cache of more than 100 lead curse tablets. all meticulously prepared and deposited together. And these were not the curses of jealous lovers or angry merchants. They were all targeted at the leading politicians, orators, and public figures of Athens. It was a buried archive of political warfare, a clear indication that while citizens debated in the agora by day, by night they were secretly trying to bind the tongues and shatter the minds of their opponents using supernatural means. Curses in the Bible, a divine weapon. In the ancient Near East, magic and religion were often two sides of the same coin. Yet in the scriptures of the Abrahamic faiths, a hard line is drawn. Sorcery is forbidden, an abomination in the eyes of God. But this same text, the Old Testament, is filled to the brim with curses. How can this be? The distinction, for the ancient Hebrews, was one of authority. A curse uttered by a common sorcerer was an illegal appeal to dark forces. A curse uttered by a prophet, or by God himself, was an instrument of divine justice, as legitimate and terrible as a flood or a fire from the heavens. And these were not fleeting curses. They had weight, permanence, and often a generational echo. Think of the curse God places upon Cain after he murders his brother Abel. He is to be a fugitive and a wanderer, and the very ground will refuse to yield its crops for him. Or consider the curse Noah places upon his son Ham, condemning his descendants to servitude. Most famously, the 10 Plagues of Egypt can be read as a series of 10 escalating national-level divine curses, systematically dismantling the country's ecology, economy, and social structure, all wielded by God through his prophet, Moses. This creates a subtle but profound theological quandary. Where does one draw the line between an earnest prayer for an enemy to be punished by God and a magical ritual designed to bring about that same punishment? The intent can seem nearly identical. The answer, it seems, lies in who holds the authority. For the ultimate proof of this, we need look no further than the Book of Numbers, which contains a detailed, legally codified ritual that is, for all intents and purposes, a state-sanctioned trial by curse. It is known as the ordeal of the bitter water. If a man suspected his wife of infidelity, but had no proof, he could bring her before the priests at the tabernacle. There the priest would prepare a potion, holy water mixed with dust from the tabernacle floor. The woman would be made to swear an oath of innocence. The priest would then write the words of the curse on a scroll and wash the ink into the bitter water. The woman was then forced to drink it. If she was innocent, nothing would happen. But if she was guilty, the text states the curse that brings bitterness would enter her body, causing her abdomen to swell and her thigh to waste away. This was not back-alley sorcery. This was divine jurisprudence, a holy lie detector test, where the punishment was administered directly by the cursed object itself, all under the watchful eye of God and his priests. Druidic curses, magic of word and nature. We travel now to the misty, rain-soaked forests of ancient Gaul and the British Isles, home to the Celts and their enigmatic priest class, the Druids. The Druids are a people shrouded in mystery, for they committed none of their sacred knowledge to writing, believing it would dilute its power. What we know of them comes almost exclusively from the accounts of their enemies, the Romans, who both feared and respected them. And what the Romans tell us is that the Druids' greatest weapon was not a sword or a spear, but the spoken word itself. They were masters of a terrifying form of curse known as the glam dicen. This was not a simple insult. It was a ritual satire, a curse delivered in the form of a poem or chant, crafted with such venomous magical intent that it was believed to have a direct physical effect. A person targeted by a glam dicen could expect to break out in painful boils and physical blemishes, to lose their wits and be driven to madness, or to simply waste away from a profound and inexplicable shame. The power of the word was absolute. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder and Tacitus described Druids standing on the battlefield, their arms raised, uttering dreadful incantations that could paralyze entire legions with fear, their words supposedly stopping arrows in mid-flight. But can we trust these accounts? After all, these were written by conquerors. It served Roman political interests to portray the Druids as powerful, sinister figures, thereby justifying the extreme brutality Rome used to exterminate their order. Perhaps they were exaggerating. And yet, one account from the most famous Roman of all, Julius Caesar, reveals a truth that is arguably more terrifying than any magical boil or paralyzing spell. Caesar wrote that the most severe punishment the Druids could inflict was a form of excommunication. If a person was cursed and cast out, they were forbidden from attending any religious sacrifices or festivals. But it went far beyond that. They became untouchable. No one was permitted to speak to them or associate with them, lest they become tainted by the curse. They were denied justice in the law. They were, in effect, rendered invisible. It was a social death, a complete and total erasure of a person's identity while they were still alive. They became a ghost walking among their own people, a fate that, for a person in a tribal society, may well have been worse than any clean death in battle. We have explored the intricate machinery of cursing as a tool of state, politics, and religion. But this raises an even more profound question. Did these rituals actually work beyond mere psychology? To answer that, we must dive deeper, past the spells, and into the shadows where magic intersects with law, medicine, and the terrifying power of the human mind itself. Level 3. Egyptian Execration Texts, a bureaucratic guide to magical warfare. Imagine for a moment a top-secret intelligence briefing in a modern government. Analysts present lists of hostile nations, rival leaders, and terrorist cells that pose a threat to national security. Now, transport that same concept back 3,500 years to the shimmering banks of the Nile. The lists are the same: enemies of the state, rebellious vassals, troublesome foreign kings. But the prescribed course of action is not sanctions or diplomacy. It is a state-sanctioned ritual of total magical annihilation. Welcome to the world of the Egyptian Execration Texts. This was not folk magic whispered in the dark. This was an official instrument of the pharaoh's foreign policy, as bureaucratic as collecting taxes and as solemn as a religious festival. The process was chillingly systematic. Scribes in the royal court would compile detailed lists of all who threatened Egypt. These were not vague entries. They named specific Nubian chieftains, Canaanite city-states, Libyan tribes, and even individual Egyptians within the court suspected of treason. These names, these very words that held the essence of the enemy, were then inscribed onto simple, everyday objects: red clay pottery bowls, or small, crude figurines of bound prisoners, their arms twisted behind their backs in perpetual submission. Then, the public ritual would begin. In a sacred space, before priests and officials, these objects were declared to be the enemies themselves, and then they were destroyed. The pottery was ceremonially smashed, shattering the enemy's power. The figurines were stomped underfoot, stabbed with miniature spears, and finally thrown into a great fire to be consumed. But was this merely a symbolic act, a piece of political theater designed to boost morale and project an image of the pharaoh's unassailable power? Or did the Egyptians, a people whose entire civilization was built upon the concept of cosmic order, or Ma'at, truly believe they were reaching across the desert sands to smite their foes? The evidence suggests they believed it completely. For them, magic was a science, a tangible force that could be projected and controlled. Destroying the name was destroying the person, Shattering the effigy was shattering the army. These acts were not a substitute for war. They were the essential magical prelude, a way of weakening the enemy in the spiritual realm to ensure victory in the physical one. And in a stunning twist of historical irony, this ancient practice of magical destruction has provided modern historians with one of their most valuable tools. These smashed potsherds and burned figures, these kill lists of the ancient world, are a priceless record of Egypt's foreign relations. They tell us precisely who Egypt considered an enemy and when. They are a geopolitical map written in the language of a curse. The pharaoh's dark magic has become our historical insight, a perfect testament to a civilization where bureaucracy and sorcery worked hand in hand. The Nocebo effect, when belief itself is the killer. What if the deadliest poison in a sorcerer's arsenal was not brewed in a cauldron, but was instead distilled within the victim's own mind? We are all familiar with the placebo effect, where a person's belief in a useless sugar pill can produce real, measurable healing. But every force in nature has its opposite, its dark twin. And the dark twin of the placebo is the nocebo effect. The word comes from the Latin for "I shall harm," and it describes a chillingly powerful phenomenon. If a person truly, deeply believes something will harm them, it can. The curse is the perfect delivery mechanism for the nocebo effect. Let us step back into the ancient world, into a society where belief in the power of magic is not a fringe idea, but a fundamental truth, as real as the sun in the sky and the ground under your feet. One day, you are publicly accused and cursed by a powerful priest or a feared witch. Your entire community, your friends, your family, all believe in the power of this curse. They begin to shun you, to look away when you pass, fearing that the bad luck is contagious. This social isolation is the first step. Then, the true work begins, inside your own head. Every setback, every stomach cramp, every sleepless night is no longer a random occurrence. It is proof that the curse is working. You are consumed by a state of hypervigilance and terror. This chronic stress floods your body with hormones like cortisol, suppressing your immune system, elevating your blood pressure, and disrupting your digestion. You stop eating, you stop sleeping, and your health begins to genuinely deteriorate. The curse becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, powered by the relentless engine of your own fear. Could the ancient masters of these rituals have understood this mechanism? Perhaps not in our modern clinical terms, but they were keen observers of human nature. The most compelling evidence for this came not from an archaeologist, but from a Harvard physiologist. In the year 1942, Walter Bradford Cannon published a landmark paper titled Voodoo Death. He had studied accounts from Aboriginal and tribal cultures around the world, where seemingly healthy individuals, after being cursed by a shaman, would simply lie down and die within a day or two, with no discernible physical cause. Cannon's theory was radical. He proposed that the absolute, overwhelming terror of being supernaturally condemned triggers a catastrophic response from the sympatho-adrenal system, the body's fight-or-flight mechanism. It is a storm of adrenaline so intense and so sustained that it causes the capillaries and small blood vessels to constrict and collapse, leading to a fatal drop in blood pressure and circulatory shock. The victim does not die from magic, they die from fear. Legal responsibility for witchcraft, a crime of malice. It should come as no surprise, then, that in many ancient societies, the act of cursing someone was not seen as a harmless superstition. It was a serious criminal offense, as real and as punishable as assault or murder. The law codes of the ancient world are remarkably clear on this. In 5th century Rome, the foundational legal document known as the Laws of the 12 Tables contained a specific provision against malum carmen, which can be translated as an evil song or a malevolent incantation. If you were found to have chanted a spell that caused harm to another person or damaged their crops, the punishment could be death. Go back even further to the 18th century before the Common Era in Mesopotamia. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest deciphered legal texts, includes articles that deal directly with accusations of witchcraft. If one man accused another of casting a spell, the accused was subjected to an ordeal by water. He had to leap into the holy river, and if the river overpowered him, he was guilty, and his accuser could take possession of his house. The law itself acknowledged the existence and danger of black magic. This legal reality, however, creates a fascinating and terrifying problem: evidence. How could a Roman court possibly prove that a citizen's ailing livestock was the result of their neighbor's curse and not a common disease? How could a Babylonian judge know for certain that a man's misfortune was caused by a spell? This ambiguity opened the door to a world of paranoia and malicious accusations. A personal grudge, a business rivalry, or simple jealousy could easily be weaponized into a formal, legal accusation of witchcraft with potentially fatal consequences. And yet, this is where the story takes an even more interesting turn. The fact that cursing was an illegal act, but one that was widely practiced, created a new and thriving underground economy. If you were a wealthy Roman who believed a rival had hired a mage to place a curse tablet against you, you had options beyond the law. You could in turn hire your own magical practitioner. This mage would act as a kind of supernatural defense consultant. They would perform diagnostic rituals to determine the nature of the curse, and then execute a powerful counter-ritual, a spell of unbinding or reversing, designed to nullify the original hex, and perhaps even send it back to the original caster. This was a sophisticated, competitive market of magical services, a hidden world of spells and counterspells, operating just beneath the surface of societies that publicly condemned it. Assyrian Maklu tablets, a manual for exorcism. Imagine the sheer, helpless terror of believing you have been cursed. You feel your health failing, your luck abandoning you. You are convinced an unseen enemy is methodically destroying your life from the shadows, and you have no way to fight back. For the people of ancient Assyria in the first millennium before the Common Era, this fear was a constant and palpable threat. But they were not defenseless. They had a response, a vast, complex, and powerful ritual known as the Maklu, which translates simply as the burning. The Maklu was not just a simple prayer or a single incantation. It was an epic. The complete text, inscribed on a series of 9 cuneiform tablets, contains the full script for an elaborate 9-hour-long ceremony of counter-magic and exorcism. It was a production designed to be performed through the night, led by a specialist priest, the Ashipu, to cleanse an individual from the effects of any and all witchcraft. The sheer scale of the Maklu is breathtaking, and it reveals just how seriously the Assyrians, a famously militaristic and pragmatic people, took the threat of black magic. The core of the ritual involved identifying and destroying the witch or warlock, even if their identity was unknown. The afflicted person would create effigies of their unseen magical assailant, and then, throughout the night, these effigies would be systematically destroyed while the priest recited hundreds of incantations, appealing to the gods of justice and, most importantly, Nusku, the god of fire, to act as the divine arbiter and destroyer. This was spiritual warfare, formalized into a state-approved liturgy. But the true genius of the Maklu lies in its meticulous detail, in the specific materials prescribed for the destruction of the enemy sorcerer. This was not a simple burning. The text details a multi-stage process of magical deconstruction. An effigy made of bitumen, a black tar-like substance, would be burned, with the priest chanting that just as the bitumen is consumed, so too should the witch's magic be consumed. A figure made of clay would be dissolved in water, symbolically washing away the curse's power. A figure made from dough would be tossed to a dog, consigning the witch's spirit to the creatures of the underworld. A figurine of bronze would be melted down in a crucible, ensuring the permanent and irreversible dissolution of their being. Each material targeted a different aspect of the enemy's power, a multi-pronged magical assault, designed to not only break the curse, but to utterly annihilate the soul of the one who cast it. We have seen how the power of law, society, and the mind itself could turn a curse into a deadly weapon. But what if there is more? We must now descend into the abyss, to the very edge of our known history, and ask a disturbing question. What if some ancient curses were not magic at all, but a terrifyingly clever disguise for tangible, physical weapons of biology, acoustics, and information itself? Level 4. Curses as biological weapons. We have explored curses as words, as rituals, as weapons of the mind. But now we must entertain a far more chilling and pragmatic possibility. What if some of the most effective curses in history were never spoken at all? What if they were administered silently, invisibly, under the guise of magic, using the oldest and most ruthless weapon of all, biology itself? Consider the simple, terrifying act of cursing a village well. A priest could stand before the well, chant dark words, and declare the water foul and undrinkable. Days later, when the villagers begin to fall ill with fever and dysentery, it would seem like undeniable proof of his power. But the true act of malice may have occurred the night before, when under the cover of darkness, someone slipped the carcass of a diseased animal into that same well. In an age with no knowledge of germ theory, the resulting outbreak of cholera or typhoid would be indistinguishable from a supernatural attack. The curse was not the incantation, it was the bacteria. This principle extends to the very tomb of the Pharaohs. The legend of the curse gained its power from the mysterious illnesses that afflicted some members of Carter's expedition. But what if the guardian of the tomb was not a vengeful spirit, but a dormant microorganism? In the dark, damp, sealed environment of a tomb, certain species of mold and fungi, such as Aspergillus, can flourish for millennia. When the 3,000-year-old seal is broken, these microscopic spores are released into the air. If inhaled by someone with a weakened immune system, they can cause severe, sometimes fatal, respiratory infections. The symptoms, fever, coughing, lung failure, would appear to be the slow, inexorable work of a pharaoh's curse. The magic was, in fact, mycology. But the most explicit example of this biological dark artistry comes from the windswept steppes of Eurasia, from the horse lords known as the Scythians. The Greek historian Herodotus tells us of their horrifying method for envenoming their arrows. They would milk vipers for their poison, but they did not stop there. They would mix this venom with human blood and then bury the concoction in a sealed pot under a dung heap. The heat and bacteria in the manure would cause the mixture to putrefy and ferment into a foul, necrotic sludge. When an arrow tipped in this substance struck a warrior, the snake venom was only the beginning of their ordeal. The true weapon was the cocktail of bacteria, Clostridium perfringens and Clostridium tetani, introduced deep into the wound. It would cause a swift and agonizing death from gas gangrene and tetanus. For the victim and his comrades, who knew nothing of this grotesque alchemy, the effect would be pure black magic. A minor scratch that swelled, turned black, and devoured a warrior from the inside out. It was a curse delivered at the speed of an arrow. Acoustic curses and infrasound. Have you ever walked into an old, empty room and felt an immediate, inexplicable sense of dread? A feeling of a presence, a weight in the air that makes the hair on your arms stand up. We call these places haunted or cursed, and for millennia, We have attributed these feelings to the lingering spirits of the dead. But what if that chilling presence is not a ghost, but a sound? A sound so low that you cannot consciously hear it, but your body can most certainly feel it. This is the world of infrasound. Infrasound refers to sound waves at a frequency below 20 Hz, which is the lower limit of human hearing. While our ears cannot process these frequencies, the long, powerful waves can vibrate through the ground and through our bodies, affecting our internal organs. Exposure to infrasound can produce a wide range of deeply unsettling physiological effects: a feeling of anxiety and sorrow, a sense of pressure on the chest that can make breathing feel difficult, and a profound, bone-deep feeling of unease. It is, in essence, the physical sensation of fear itself, divorced from any obvious cause. And here is where it connects to the ancient world. Infrasound is not just a product of modern technology. It occurs in nature. Wind howling through a narrow canyon, waves crashing on a shore, even certain weather patterns can generate it. Now, imagine an ancient temple or a tomb, constructed in a place where these natural infrasonic waves are common. Or more intriguingly, what if ancient architects, through trial and error, discovered how to build structures that would generate infrasound themselves? A long corridor, a specific arrangement of standing stones, a precisely cut opening in a wall, all could be designed to turn a steady wind into an invisible, silent, and terrifying guardian. Anyone who entered this cursed place would be overcome with a sense of irrational terror, the feeling of a malevolent presence, all without understanding the physical mechanism at play. They would flee, convinced they had angered the gods or awakened a vengeful spirit. The most remarkable piece of this puzzle, however, explains one of the most common paranormal experiences. Modern scientific studies have demonstrated that infrasound at a specific frequency of around 19 Hz is very close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. This means the sound wave can cause your eye to vibrate, ever so slightly. This subtle vibration can create optical illusions, specifically in your peripheral vision. It is the classic seeing a shadowy figure out of the corner of your eye that vanishes when you turn to look. It is not a ghost, it is an artifact of physics, an acoustic trick played on your own optic nerve. The ancient curse, the haunting of a sacred place, could have been a perfectly tuned, silent sound wave. Cursed languages and linguistic coding, words have power. We have accepted this as the foundation of our entire journey, but we have largely treated words as a vehicle, a way to deliver an intent. Now we must consider a more radical idea. What if, in some ancient systems, the language itself was the power? What if the symbols, the very sounds, were seen as dangerous technologies that could backfire if handled by the uninitiated? This was precisely the belief in the Norse world regarding their alphabet of runes. For the rune masters, these were not simply letters for writing. Each of the 24 symbols of the Elder Futhark was a potent magical ideogram, a container for a fundamental cosmic force. To carve a rune was not to write a word, it was to invoke a power. But this meant the language had a built-in danger. To carve a rune incorrectly, to place it in the wrong sequence, or to use it with impure intent could unleash that power in a destructive, uncontrolled way. It could bring ruin upon the carver, a curse born not of malice, but of simple error. The language itself was booby-trapped. This leads us to another mystery: the many ancient languages, like Etruscan, that remain largely undeciphered. What if some of these cryptic texts were not meant to be read in the conventional sense at all? What if their primary function was not communication, but magical protection? A text that no one can read is a perfect magical seal. It is a lock for which the key has been lost, and its power lies in its very inscrutability. The curse in this case is aimed at the curious, a warning that attempting to unlock its secrets without the proper knowledge would be to invite disaster. This entire concept finds a fascinating echo in a cutting-edge modern idea, the theory of memetic weapons. A meme, in its original sense, is a unit of cultural information, an idea, a symbol, a story that spreads from mind to mind. A memetic weapon, therefore, is a piece of information that is inherently harmful to anyone who processes it. Think of a computer virus, but for the human brain. Ancient curses can be seen as the earliest, most primitive form of this. A story is told of a cursed tomb. That story spreads through the population. The fear, the paranoia, the belief in the curse becomes a virus of the mind, infecting everyone it touches and causing them to behave in self-destructive ways. The curse is not the Pharaoh's magic. The curse is the story of the Pharaoh's magic. It is a self-replicating weapon made of pure information. Hereditary curses as genetic memory. There is no trope more ancient or more tragic than that of the cursed bloodline. The family doomed to generation after generation of madness, violence, and misfortune. We see it in Greek mythology, in Gothic novels, in the folklore of every culture on Earth. It is the idea that the sins of the father are not just visited upon the son, but are branded into his very soul. For centuries, this was seen as either divine retribution or supernatural meddling. But what if the ancients were observing a real biological phenomenon, a dark inheritance passed down not by a vengeful god, but by the subtle chemistry of our own DNA? To understand this, we must look to the revolutionary field of epigenetics. Your DNA is like a vast library of blueprints, but epigenetics is the librarian. It does not change the books themselves, but it places sticky notes on certain pages, marking them as read this or ignore this. These epigenetic markers are chemical tags that attach to your DNA and can switch genes on or off. And here is the crucial discovery. Science has now proven that a profound trauma, war, famine, extreme stress, experienced by one person can cause epigenetic changes that can be passed down to their children and even their grandchildren. The trauma of your ancestors can leave a chemical echo on your genes, predisposing you to anxiety, depression, or a heightened stress response, without you ever having experienced the original trauma yourself. Now, let us look back at the ancient world through this new lens. An observer in a village would see a family where the grandfather was a warrior who suffered greatly in battle. They see his son grow up to be melancholic and prone to fits of rage. They see the grandson plagued by nightmares and ill health. Lacking any knowledge of genetics, what conclusion could they possibly draw? They would call it a family curse. They were accurately identifying a pattern of inherited suffering, but they could only explain it with the supernatural vocabulary they possessed. The curse was their name for intergenerational trauma. There is no more perfect illustration of this than the great Greek myth of the House of Atreus. The story is a relentless cascade of horror. Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter, is murdered by his wife, who is then murdered by their son, Orestes, who is in turn driven mad by the Furies. The ancient Greeks saw this as the working of a powerful, divine curse, a cosmic debt of blood being paid down through the generations. Today we can read it as perhaps the most powerful metaphor for hereditary trauma ever written. It is a story not about the gods, but about how violence begets violence, and how the wounds of one generation can bleed through into the next. The curse was not in their stars, but in their cells. But even these startling scientific explanations have their limits. To go further, we must unmoor ourselves from the shores of verifiable history and plunge into the deepest, darkest waters of speculation, where curses are not just weapons, but the forgotten technologies of lost gods and alien visitors. Level 5. Curses, the technology of ancient gods. We have traveled through the corridors of history, psychology, and fringe science. Now we must take the final step and leave the map behind entirely. We enter a realm of radical speculation, where the line between magic and science dissolves completely. The guiding principle of this realm was articulated by the writer Arthur C. Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So, let us entertain a thought. What if the curses of the ancient world were not magic at all, but the remnants of a technology so advanced it could only be interpreted as magic? This is the core tenet of the paleocontact theory. This narrative suggests that our ancient ancestors were visited by an extraterrestrial civilization, beings they perceived as gods. These gods possessed technology far beyond our comprehension, and they left pieces of it behind. In this view, a curse is not a spell. It is an automated defense system. The legendary curse of Tutankhamun's tomb transforms from a pharaoh's spiritual wrath into a sophisticated security protocol. Perhaps the sarcophagus was coated with a slow-release radioactive isotope, a silent, invisible poison designed to eliminate intruders over a period of weeks or months. Or perhaps the very air inside was seeded with genetically engineered fungal spores, microscopic guardians programmed to activate upon contact with oxygen. The wrath of the gods, striking down a blasphemer from the heavens with a bolt of lightning, could be reimagined as the targeted use of a directed energy weapon, operated from an orbital platform or a hidden terrestrial installation. The priests and pharaohs, in this scenario, were not sorcerers. They were simply the designated operators, the inheritors of a complex system whose scientific principles they no longer fully understood. They followed the ancient instructions, the rituals, passed down from the gods, knowing only that performing certain actions produced certain devastating results. And the most compelling exhibit for this theory is perhaps the most famous religious artifact in history, the Ark of the Covenant. In the biblical account, the Ark is an object of immense power and immense danger. It strikes down those who touch it improperly. It unleashes plagues. It is a weapon of war. But what if it was not a holy chest, but a piece of alien hardware? Proponents of this theory suggest the Ark was a powerful electrical capacitor, intricately constructed with layers of gold to store a massive charge. The cherubim on top could have acted as spark gap electrodes. The poles used to carry it were not just for transport. They were insulation. The curse that struck down Uzzah for steadying the Ark was not divine anger. It was a fatal electrical discharge, the tragic result of a man who did not understand the operating manual of a powerful and dangerous machine. Cursed artifacts of Atlantis. From the stars, we turn our gaze inward, to the depths of our own planet's mythic past. What if humanity's history is not a straight line of progress, but a fractured cycle? What if, long before Egypt or Sumeria, there existed a great global civilization that rose to incredible heights, and then vanished in a cataclysm? A civilization like Atlantis or Lemuria. According to these esoteric traditions, the science of the Atlanteans was fundamentally different from our own. It was not a technology of machines and combustion, but a technology of the mind, of crystals, and of harmonic vibrations. They had mastered a form of physics that treated consciousness and energy as the primary building blocks of the universe. And when their continent sank, some of their most powerful artifacts were scattered across the globe, becoming time bombs of forgotten science. This is the proposed origin of the world's most famously cursed objects. An artifact like the Hope Diamond, whose string of owners have met with tragedy, madness, and ruin, is, in this view, not cursed with a supernatural hex. Instead, it is a piece of Atlantean technology, a crystalline storage device still running a complex, energetic program that we cannot comprehend. Its resonant frequency might subtly disrupt the bioelectric field of its owner, causing mental instability and attracting misfortune. The curse is simply a high-level function that modern humans, with our comparatively primitive understanding of physics, interact with incorrectly, with disastrous results. It is the equivalent of a tribal man finding a live grenade and using it as a hammer. The devastating outcome is not a result of malice, but of a profound and dangerous misunderstanding of the object's true nature. And this theory offers a grand cinematic explanation for one of Earth's most enduring mysteries, the Bermuda Triangle. According to this narrative, the triangle is not a cursed patch of ocean. It is the site of a catastrophic industrial accident from the ancient past. Buried deep beneath the seabed lies the ruins of a great Atlantean power station, perhaps a colossal energy crystal damaged during the cataclysm that destroyed their civilization. This malfunctioning piece of ancient technology is still active, pulsing erratically. It warps the local electromagnetic field, causing compasses to spin and electronics to fail. It may even be powerful enough to periodically distort the fabric of space-time itself, causing ships and planes to vanish without a trace. The curse of the Bermuda Triangle is the ghost of a dead technology, a scar on the face of the planet, left by a civilization that played with forces we are only just beginning to imagine. Secret societies, the keepers of curses. We have considered technologies lost to time and space, but there is a third, more paranoid possibility. What if the ancient knowledge was never truly lost? What if it was simply taken underground, guarded, and refined in secret, wielded by a select few to shape the course of human history from the shadows? This is the grand conspiracy, the theory that the ancient priestly castes, the mages of Egypt, the astronomers of Babylon, the Druids of the Celts, never truly disappeared. They merely evolved, their esoteric orders transforming over the centuries into the secret societies that haunt our modern imagination. The Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, the Illuminati. According to this worldview, these organizations are the direct inheritors of the ancient verbal technologies and the arts of symbolic magic, and they continue to use them, not to hex their personal rivals, but to control the destiny of nations. In this dark narrative, major world events are rarely accidental. A global financial crisis is not just the result of market forces, it is a complex ritual designed to transfer wealth and power. A sudden war is the result of carefully placed sigils and incantations inflaming national tensions. The very architecture of our world capitals, particularly places like Washington, D.C. or London, are said to be laid out according to principles of sacred geometry, vast magical circles designed to channel power and influence the consciousness of the population. The symbols on a dollar bill are not mere decoration. They are elements of a global spell for prosperity and control. And at its most extreme, this theory recontextualizes some of the most traumatic events in modern history as occult rituals. The most shocking example is the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. To the conspiracy theorist, the bewildering inconsistencies and political motives are a smokescreen. The true nature of the event, they claim, was a public ritual human sacrifice. Kennedy, the young and vibrant leader, was cast in the ancient archetypal role of the king victim, or the dying god, whose public death was believed to unleash a massive wave of psychic energy, a blood sacrifice needed to consecrate a new era or achieve some vast, hidden, magical objective. It is a terrifying thought that the levers of history are being pulled not in parliaments and boardrooms, but in candlelit chambers, by men who speak the forgotten languages of power. Quantum magic, the curse as an alteration of reality. We have reached the absolute bottom of the iceberg. the point where speculation crystallizes into a form of pseudo-scientific mysticism. Here we must ask the most fundamental question of all. What is reality? For most of our history, we have assumed it is a fixed, objective state. But the bizarre discoveries of quantum physics in the last century have suggested something far stranger. They have shown us that, at the subatomic level, reality seems to exist in a shimmering cloud of probabilities until it is observed. The very act of looking at something seems to force it to choose a definite state. This is the famous observer effect, best illustrated by the thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat, which is both alive and dead until the box is opened. This is where the ultimate theory of curses takes root. It proposes that the ancient magicians were not just psychologists or tricksters, they were intuitive quantum physicists. They understood, on some deep level, that consciousness is not a passive observer of the universe, but an active participant in its creation. A curse, in this paradigm, is the ultimate act of focused will. A trained and powerful magician, it is theorized, could learn to focus their consciousness with such laser-like intensity that they could reach out and influence the probabilistic wave function of their victim. They could force that shimmering cloud of infinite possibilities to collapse into the single, most negative, most destructive outcome. Illness, accidents, financial ruin, all become the inevitable result of having your quantum reality hacked. Your bad luck is no longer a matter of chance. It is a matter of directed, conscious intent. And in this breathtakingly strange model, all the rituals of magic are suddenly reframed. The chanting, the symbols, the circles of power, the blood sacrifices, these are not primitive superstitions. They are a necessary algorithm, a spiritual technology, a complex user interface, required to focus the scattered, chaotic human mind to the point where it can perform this incredible feat of reality engineering. The magician is no longer a mystic praying to spirits. The magician becomes a programmer, writing code in the language of symbols and intention, and executing that code directly on the operating system of the universe itself. We began our journey in the dust of a pharaoh's tomb, with a curse that was little more than a newspaper headline. We have traveled through the leaden malice of Rome, the psychological terror of the Nocebo effect, and descended into the abyss of forgotten technologies and quantum conspiracies. We are left with a final, unsettling question. Is a curse merely a relic of a superstitious past, a phantom of the mind? Or is our belief, or disbelief, the only thing that determines its power to shape our reality? The answer, it seems, is still buried, waiting to be unearthed.